All right. A question for John Ruddick. John, how are the government's climate policies? What are they like in Australia, and why are you leading the charge against them?
Well, look, I follow American politics closely. I know that climate change, global warming, is a big deal in American politics. You had the Inflation Reduction Act, which was most of it was government spending on the silly climate projects. But in Australia, the reason I invited Joel to come out here and do a pre-tour and to do a launch of it in Australia first as a world premiere is because Australia is completely obsessed with this issue. So the equivalent, we've got, the equivalent of the Republican Party is called the Liberal Party in this country. It's generally a right of centre party, completely sold out on all this garbage. Now, the reason why people like Al Gore and others are targeting Australia is that we are one of the biggest fossil fuel exporters, and we've got a very gullible public. Now, Roger, I should tell you, I became obsessed with Al Gore, I suppose you could say. You've heard of Trump derangement syndrome. I've had Gore derangement syndrome for 24 years since the Florida recount. And I was very impressed with his political skills. He was dealt a difficult hand. And I just thought, look, this guy is like unstoppable. I mean, he's really on a mission. And I went into this long study. I read all the books I could about Al Gore, and I had a Google alert, and I was following him very, very closely. And then, he comes along with the inconvenient truth. And I really believe, Roger, he is the most influential human being this century so far. He's tricked governments all around the world and the media. Now, what Joel has done is, so when Joel and I first started talking about this project, he said to me, because I'd showed him some articles I'd written in the Spectator Australia, he said, "Oh, John, you must be the world's authority on Al Gore." But I have to say, Roger, that Joel is the world's #1 Gore researcher. He has uncovered some key facts here, which he outlined a few minutes ago, which no other researcher had worked out. It's absolutely damning. It's a brilliant film. The world needs to see this film because we are suffering a mass delusion. This is like the new religion for irreligious people. And it's the story of the big lie. A lot of people think, oh, well, they might be exaggerating it, but there must be some truth to it. No, there's not. As Joel said, carbon dioxide is our friend, not our enemy.
John, I want to point out that you actually rose in the Australian government and announced your support for President Donald Trump. So you clearly do follow American politics very closely. And as you know, the president has not only just won, he's won what I think is a transformative victory. In other words, I think here in America, we're undergoing a complete political realignment. The real division here in America is not between Republicans and Democrats. It's between people of common sense, people who support peace, people who support free speech, people who would like to be certain that we're not being poisoned by the food we eat or the drugs that in some cases we're required to take, and those who would have us rush headlong into world war. Those are the people who I think responsible for this lightning uprising in Syria, which adds greater instability to a region that was already extraordinarily unstable. People who openly admit, Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, that speech they don't agree with should be banned, and people should be prosecuted for saying things that they don't agree with, enemies of free speech, and of course, carte blanche for the pharmaceutical industry. Just in recent days, Donald Trump has been, I think, totally reasonably saying, look, we need to examine these issues. Let's get to the bottom. Some people say that vaccinations have a tie to autism. Others say that that is not so. Different scientists and different doctors disagree. Where is the harm in examining the question and getting to the truth? You can imagine how popular that is with the executives at Pfizer. Let's get back to climate change. Joel, how do you think this entire climate movement has affected the American economy so far?
Well, it's affected it even more so in places like Europe and Australia, where they have real hysteria. They have real climate panic. Here, it's still growing. They want to, of course, shut down coal mines. They want to limit farming, use of fertilizers. So it can have a devastating effect on the economy. I think Australia and Europe actually have negative growth, and it's all tied to these carbon reduction policies. In our country, of course, they want us to send billions to third world countries due to these climate conferences that they have. When they have a climate conference, the only way they get an agreement is to let China, India, and all of Africa off the hook. You guys don't have to do anything, but the Western countries will send you hundreds of billions of dollars. So those third world countries are more than happy to agree to sign up for it. And our treasury is being looted essentially by this idea that Al Gore put forward in 1992 when he lied and said there's too much carbon dioxide. He made up where he got it from. And I think this is the first film, The Climate According to AI Al Gore, that has a chance to really make an impact, because there have been climate hoax movies around before, but they tend to be kind of a lecture and a lot of talking heads. This is very entertaining because we have an AI version of Al Gore, and I talked to him about his whole life history and where he really got his climate science from. So the devastating effects will come to this country if Donald Trump doesn't follow through on his promise to turn around these climate panic policies of the previous administration.
John, I know that this film was premiered in Australia. What was reaction to the film?
Well, we had about 5 screenings around the country, including in our federal parliament, in the theatre out there. Look, everybody that watched it wanted to know how they could get it and share it with their friends, because they think it's a very powerful message. So, look, there is still I saw a poll a few years ago which said that of all the countries in the world, the United States has the highest percentage of climate skeptics. I think it was about 40%. Australia was second. We were about, and this was a few years ago, 1 in 3 people are prepared to tell a pollster that they are skeptical of the global warming orthodoxy. So I think that is encouraging. And my party, which is the Libertarian Party, is a growing force in this country. And we believe in the separation of state, the separation of the state and the energy market. Our electricity prices are going through the roof. Joel just said he had a blackout in California. We had a blackout in Australia's finest city, where I'm sitting right now in Sydney, okay, which is one of the world's great cities, a very advanced city, but we had a blackout. And why is that? Australia is sitting on thousands of years of coal, beautiful coal, that we sell to China and India. It's our biggest export earner. But we are, in the name of this crazy religion, we are blowing it all up. And so, look, I think that now that I think Joel's film's going to be officially released in the next few days, I'm hoping that it's going to be take off in Australia, because we need it here more than any other country.
I'm very interested in your discussion of the Libertarian Party of Australia. How many seats do you have in the parliament, and how do you see the future of the party?
Well, we are. I'm in the New South Wales Parliament, so that's the biggest state in Australia. So, and then we have somebody in Victoria, which is in our second biggest state. But we are a growing force in Australia. We do have a different electoral system where we have proportional representation for the equivalent of the Senate. So with that power, we are confident that we're getting defections, and we are growing in force. The media is starting to pay more attention to us, and because our Liberal Party, which is the equivalent of your Republican Party, I know our terms are upside down in the Down Underland, but imagine if you had the leader of a right of centre party that's basically Mitt Romney, okay, but weak on everything, sells out on everything, tries to appease the left. That's what we've got in our major party on the right, and we're very much hoping that we can sort of challenge them in the coming years.
A question for Joel Gilbert, a little off topic. You made a documentary prior to the election entitled Arrested by Kamala, A Black Mother's Story. This was the story of a woman named Sharae Peoples, a single mother who was prosecuted by District Attorney Kamala Harris because her daughter was missing from school. Her daughter was truant. However, as we know through your documentary, her daughter suffered a severe case of sickle cell anemia, had actually been hit by a stroke when she was just 12 years old, and was hospitalized during the majority of the period in which she should have been in school. You also documented in your film that the school authorities were fully aware of her situation, that they had seen all the medical documentation about her inability to come to class, and you put this up online. Uh, I believe that this important documentary played a key role in President Trump's gains among African American voters. I was just astounded by the number of Black people who showed it to me, who talked to me about it, who noticed it. It was an incredible accomplishment. Joel, how many people or how many downloads, I guess is the proper way to ask the question, do you think the documentary, particularly the 3-minute version, got?
Yeah, it was an important documentary. I agree that it had a huge impact. Donald Trump tweeted it and posted it on Truth Social 3 times. Elon Musk tweeted a version that RFK Jr.'s people put out. So it got over 60 million views. And I didn't talk to any Black people who weren't aware of it. So I think it had a big impact. And I think I did it because Kamala said she would put her record up against Donald Trump's any day when she announced for president. And I said, wait a minute, no one really looked at what she did in California. And she was a terrible attorney general. She abused and exploited, especially minority women, with this crazy idea to arrest parents if their kids miss school. And Sheree Peoples, her daughter Shayla, was in the hospital with sickle cell anemia, was arrested and tried, and lost her home, got evicted because of it. And the California Supreme Court had to rule it unconstitutional, which they did a few years later. So it just showed how callous Kamala Harris was toward Black people, especially when she was seeking, and the Democrat Party was seeking, to make her the poster child as a Black woman. But she had no understanding of the Black community and no common experiences with the Black community, having grown up in Canada with an Indian mother, and was completely unaware of the plight of Black people. And I think the Black voters understood that, and that's why they voted for Donald Trump.
I think that is an excellent analysis. Let me jump to another topic. Joel, people know you largely, of course, as a documentary filmmaker. Those who don't know you as a documentary filmmaker know you as a musician and an entertainer. But you also have an expertise in Middle Eastern affairs.
Yeah.
You are trained in these. First of all, tell us your background in that area, if you would, and then I'd like to hear your views on what has just transpired in Syria and the implications of it.
Yeah, I lived in the Middle East for a year. I have a degree from the University of London, School of Oriental and African Studies. I actually studied with some of the great minds and professors of the 20th century in Middle Eastern studies. And I've produced 2 films and written many articles about the Middle East. And I think I've tried to communicate to the people in America and the Western world that the premise of understanding of the Islamic world is deficient, that Islamists have different goals and values than Westerners, and understanding those goals and values is key to proper policy. Now, what happened in, the context of what happened in Israel, of course, goes back many years, but the Islamist movement has been around for 100 years, since the early 1900s. And it's based on the idea in Islam that Islam was successful in its first 600, 700, 800 years because of religion, because religion was the government of Islam. And that Islam only went into decline the last 300 years as their religious leaders were replaced with secular and Western government systems. So the Islamist movement seeks to return to traditional values and return to Islam dominating government throughout the Islamic world. The problem the Israelis had in the 1980s and 90s is they made a deal with the PLO, which was a secular Arab movement. And this was a movement that was rejected by the vast majority of Muslims. So the Israelis made a deal with the PLO to give them land in Gaza and the West Bank to create a Palestinian state, or the vestiges of one, even though they were not accepted by their own people. That's why the PLO was kicked out of Gaza the minute they took power by Hamas. So what you have today in Syria and throughout the Islamic world is this worldwide Islamist movement that rejects rich elites and poor masses, like in the Gulf, like in Saudi Arabia and Qatar. They reject secular government leaders like Sisi in Egypt, and these kings like the king of Jordan, the strongman in Assad in Syria. These are all governments that are rejected by Muslims. So that's why you have ISIS, all these other Hamas, Hezbollah, all these Islamist movements seek to return Islam to glory by returning religion to government. That's what it's all about. The lack of understanding by the Israelis, by American pressure, you got to cut a deal with the PLO, put them in charge, and everything's going to work out, completely blew up and backfired on the Israelis. All their peace policies blew up in their face. Every area of land, southern Lebanon, Gaza, everywhere they withdrew from for peace, that land was used to attack them, and they had to go retake those areas. And Israel today is retaking parts of Syria, especially in the eastern Golan, the western Golan Heights, that they gave up in the name of peace. So Israel has to re-examine their peace policies. And hopefully, I think Donald Trump's team is actually more pro-Israel than even the Israeli cabinet. So hopefully there'll be some common sense and understanding of the real aspirations of the Islamic world, and they won't pressure Israel into cutting deals and withdrawing from territory, because that's what leads to conflict and war.
It seems my greatest concern here is the potential, which we've seen before in Syria, for the mass slaughter of Christians. I think it's a very legitimate concern. Am I wrong to be concerned?
You're not. The history of Islam is that Islam has to be the dominant religion. Since the time of the Prophet Muhammad in Arabia, he dominated Christian and Jewish tribes in Arabia. Throughout 1,000 years of Islamic history, the place of Jews and Christians has to be a subservient tributary status where they adhere to the rule of Islam. So a tributary, or a dima as it's called in Arabic, uprising such as was in Armenia and Turkey in World War I has to be put down. Islam cannot stand for Jewish or Christian national statehood. It cannot accept it because it refutes the supremacy of Islam. So Christian and Jewish communities have always been worried, have always suffered at the hands of a Muslim majority because of their theological concept that Islam must dominate other religions. So they must be and should be very, very worried. Christian communities in Syria, of course, in Iraq, they've been decimated. And don't forget that there used to be Jewish communities in the Muslim world that are mostly all gone today because of the theology of Islam that does not accept Jewish or Christian statehood or dominance over Muslims.
All right, let's go to John Ruddick do you have a thought about the current events in Syria?
I saw a post from you earlier today, Roger, about you said it was going to reminded you of Libya. And I was very critical of what NATO did to Libya because Gaddafi was actually a lifelong enemy of the jihadis. And Libya had had a very good decade prior to that attack, and it was booming. It was very prosperous. It was tourists were going there. It was it had never been better. And then the Arab Spring comes along, and you got the jihadis are all in Benghazi. Gaddafi's going to go and take them out. Okay, which very ugly. Very brutal, okay, but the alternative was that we go and smash up Gaddafi, and then Libya becomes not just internal chaos with slave markets and poverty and people running out of food and just brutality. It became the gateway for all these illegal immigrants to jump on a little boat, hop on over to Italy and say, oh, we're European, we're in Europe now. Now, I am concerned about what's happened there because Assad is clearly a baddie. But we've got a choice. They're a baddie or a double baddie. Okay, now these guys, I hope I'm wrong, but they do appear to me to be ISIS or ISIS aligned. Okay, and yes, under Assad, the Christians were pretty well off. And we know that because they were all pro-Assad. And I find Syrian Christians to be really beautiful people, really lovely, gentle, nice people. They very much assimilate when they come and live in the West. They're good people, but they were pro-Assad. And the Christians in the Middle East, not that there's many left now, but the Christians in the Middle East are the canary in the coal mine. And so, you know, so let's hope that that the Syrian situation can turn around. But I am more pessimistic than most.
All right, I'm afraid we have to leave it there. I want to thank my friends, the documentary filmmaker Joel Gilbert, and also the Honorable John Ruddick of Australia for joining us today in the Stone Zone. Gentlemen, thank you so much. And Joel, good luck with your new documentary, The Climate According to Al Gore. It looks to me like it is indeed terrific. We'll put up a graphic where you can get where you can order it. There it is right there.